The drive to achieve one's goals at any cost can lead people to commit shocking acts and betrayals. It can be hard to grasp the lengths someone will go to achieve their dreams, especially when it endangers the lives of others. Today's story is about a tragic murder that shocked all of Brazil. The impact was felt most deeply in the small town of São João Batista. For this close-knit community, the crime is one of the most brutal and unprecedented events in history. Flávia Mafra was born on April 19, 1996 in São João Batista. A peaceful town in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, grew up in Canelinha. As the youngest child in a large, loving family, her parents worked hard to support their children. Flávia was kind, friendly, and outgoing. She excelled in her studies and had a passion for music, always surrounded by friends. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a teacher and had no plans to leave her hometown. After attending a local teacher training college, she graduated and began teaching at the elementary school she had once attended. At 20, Flávia met Valdelli Mafra. They quickly fell in love and started dating. In the summer of 2019, Valdelli proposed, and Flávia happily accepted. They got married that October, and just 2 months later, they received wonderful news. They were going to have a baby. Their joy was beyond words. In another development, Rozalba Grime was born in 1994 in Canelinha, a town in Santa Catarina. There is little information available about her early life or family background. From a young age, she was seen as unusual. People often felt she exaggerated stories, fabricated achievements, and sought to appear more important, making it hard for them to take her seriously. As she grew older, Rozalba increasingly craved attention by playing on others' sympathy. She would create tales of personal struggles and serious health issues she claimed to be facing. In one troubling incident, she tried to prevent a boyfriend from leaving by telling him she had a terminal illness, begging for his companionship during what she described as her final months. When her deception continued for a long time, she suddenly claimed to have made a miraculous recovery. In 2017, Rozalba married Zulmia Schistel, a quiet, shy man who was easygoing and agreeable. Rozalba had taken the initiative to propose the marriage, and Zulmia simply nodded in agreement. They moved into a small home in a peaceful residential area on the outskirts of town. Rozalba worked as a librarian at a local school. However, her co-workers had mixed feelings about her, primarily because of her dominant demeanor and reputation for being dishonest. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Rozalba struggled to conceive, with doctors suggesting that she might never be able to have children. Therefore, when she discovered in the fall of 2019 that she was pregnant, she was filled with joy. She quickly shared the exciting news with her family, friends, and co-workers, overcome with happiness. Rozalba even posted a picture of her positive pregnancy test on social media, announcing it to everyone she knew. In the weeks that followed, she was inundated with congratulations for her and the baby. Her husband and family treated her like a queen, shielding her from stress, taking care of everything for her. Even co-workers who had not been particularly friendly with her before began to show kindness, recognizing how long she had hoped to be a mother. In December of that year, Rozalba faced a heartbreaking event. She suffered a miscarriage in her 3rd month of pregnancy, leaving her deeply shocked and silent about her loss. Instead of sharing her pain, she chose to act as if she were still pregnant. She seemed determined to maintain the facade, perhaps knowing she might not have another chance to conceive. To support her ruse, she started wearing loose clothing and eating more to create the appearance of being pregnant. Meanwhile, a troubling plan began to emerge in her mind. About 2 months after she lost the baby, news spread at the school about the pregnancy of a young teacher named Flávia, who received many congratulations. Until that point, Rozalba and Flávia were not close. They had rarely interacted. However, Rozalba shared several fabricated stories in order to gain sympathy. She added Flávia on social media and began messaging her every day, suggesting they go for walks or chat since their due dates were similar. Rozalba asserted that they would have much in common. Flávia was initially hesitant to have lunch with Rozalba because of her eccentric reputation, but she eventually agreed during a work break. They exchanged phone numbers, and Rozalba shared several fabricated stories to gain sympathy. The only true part of her stories was that she had struggled for years to conceive and had longed for this pregnancy. Of course, she did not mention the miscarriage. Initially, they met infrequently, despite seeing each other at work almost every day. It later emerged that Rozalba had also connected with 2 other expectant mothers from the same town on social media, who she believed were at a similar stage in their pregnancies. She attempted to build friendships with them by inviting them out and asking to visit their homes. Rozalba claimed she was having a daughter. However, when she discovered that both women she had met online were having boys, she abruptly cut off contact with them. Shortly after, she found out that Flávia was expecting a girl, and from that point on, Rozalba became completely fixated on her. As time went on, it became harder for Rozalba to keep up the pretense of being pregnant. She frequently searched online for symptoms and experiences that expectant mothers often report. She would share these with her husband, family, and co-workers as if they were her own. Over several months, she gained nearly 30 pounds, but her appearance still didn't fully resemble that of someone in the later stages of pregnancy. Her husband insisted on joining her for doctor's appointments. He wanted to see the baby on the ultrasound, but Rozalba had to come up with excuses to maintain the deception. Zulmiyar was a trusting man who loved his wife and believed everything she said, which made it easier for her to keep him unaware of the truth. She would tell him that appointments had been cancelled or rescheduled due to the clinic being overbooked or the doctor being unavailable. At times, she claimed she was lucky enough to get a last-minute appointment while he was at work, and he believed her every time. To strengthen her story, Rozalba began creating fake notes on her phone that appeared to be from her doctor, including recommendations, appointment confirmations, and cancellations. Although she didn't have a strong grasp of medical terminology, often made spelling and factual errors. Zulmiyar wasn't familiar with medical details, so he had no reason to question her. To maintain the deception and avoid raising suspicion, Rozalba even sent messages to her husband pretending to be the doctor. In one message, she suggested that they temporarily pause their intimate relationship to minimize any risks to the pregnancy. He accepted this advice, believing it was from a medical expert. Rozalba developed an obsession with shopping for baby items such as onesies, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, blankets, and toys. She frequently visited stores with her husband, mother, or sister, but eventually, all her attention turned to Flávia. In July 2020, Rozalba organized an emotional maternity photo shoot. In the photos, she wore a flowing pregnancy gown and held tiny baby booties and a onesie while her husband lovingly embraced and kissed her belly, while she smiled sweetly for the camera. Everything appeared so genuine that no one suspected anything amiss. Those photos would later become part of the criminal case files. By early June 2020, Flávia and Rozalba were almost inseparable, spending time together every day. sharing thoughts and planning for the future. However, it was always Rozalba who took the initiative. Flávia, being kind and empathetic, found it hard to say no. Whenever she tried to reschedule, Rozalba would play on Flávia's sympathy, claiming she was going through personal issues, needed someone to talk to, which worked every time. Rozalba was closely watching Flávia, asking her about her symptoms, doctor visits, and medical tests. She would then share those details with her own family and husband, as if they were her own experiences. Rozalba imitated Flávia's walk, mannerisms, food cravings, and even how she held her back or moved awkwardly. Valdelli disapproved of his wife's new friendship and was upset about the time they spent together, which created tension in their marriage. They argued about it several times, but Flávia, being gentle and compassionate, couldn't bring herself to reject or ignore Rozalba. By mid-July, Rozalba had told people that she was due to deliver her baby, but she concocted another lie, claiming that the doctors had incorrectly calculated her due date. Meanwhile, she was secretly planning something disturbing, a scenario so dreadful. In August, Rozalba started planning a surprise celebration for Flávia to honor Flávia's upcoming baby. She chose decorations, invited guests, and set up a special photo area. Flávia, wanting to be polite, initially tried to decline the party. However, Rozalba became emotional, claiming she had put in a lot of effort and truly wanted to give Flávia a meaningful experience. Eventually, Flávia reluctantly agreed, unaware of the twists ahead. The celebration was scheduled for August 27th, 2020. Rozalba managed all the details, promised to send the location and final arrangements to the guests. However, the day before the event, Rozalba contacted each guest and claimed the celebration had to be postponed due to unexpected issues. She assured them she would provide a new date and time soon. Her explanation was convincing, and no one questioned it, nor did anyone reach out to Flávia, who remained completely in the dark. On August 27th, at the originally planned time, Rozalba picked up Flávia, telling her they were going to the baby shower. Because it was meant to be a women-only event, Flávia's husband, Valdelli, stayed home. He walked his heavily pregnant wife to Rozalba's car, completely unaware this would be the last time he saw her. As they drove, Flávia was oblivious to their destination. Rozalba said it was a surprise, and a few minutes into the drive, she suggested Flávia wear a blindfold to keep it a secret. Flávia hesitated, but eventually agreed, not sensing any danger. During the drive, Rozalba kept the conversation light to help Flávia feel relaxed and avoid raising any suspicions. They went to an abandoned ceramics warehouse in Canelinha's Galera neighborhood. After helping Flávia out of the car while she was still blindfolded, Rozalba guided her into one of the old buildings. The silence and strange smell likely made Flávia uneasy. When she reached up to take off the blindfold, Rozalba suddenly struck her head with a heavy brick. Rozalba hit she multiple times until she collapsed on the floor. In a final act of violence, Rozalba punched her in the face. It seemed Rozalba had wanted to hurt her as much as possible, despite once calling her a friend. Without checking if Flávia was still alive, Rozalba hurried to carry out the next phase of her horrific plan. She had brought a box cutter, some rags, and a blanket to the scene. With a steady hand, she began to cut into her friend, Flávia. Rozalba had no medical training, no understanding of anatomy, and no idea how a C-section was performed. Despite this, she started slicing into Flávia's abdomen with the box cutter, trying to retrieve the baby. She acted aggressively, using too much force and lacking precision. The box cutter, unlike a surgical instrument, tore through the skin rather than creating clean cuts. Rozalba had completely misunderstood the reality of what she was attempting. What she thought would be a quick procedure turned out to be chaotic and messy. The process took much longer than she expected, and her frustration grew, resulting in her accidentally cutting the baby several times while trying to pull her out. The environment was entirely unsanitary. Rozalba didn't even attempt to clean the tools she had brought. The fact that the baby survived the ordeal was nearly miraculous. After finally extracting the baby, she wrapped the newborn in the blanket and placed her in the back seat of her car. Rozalba then wiped her hands as best as she could, changed into clean clothes she had brought from home, and threw her blood-stained outfit into the trunk. She paused to rehearse her story before heading to the hospital. In her haste, Rozalba forgot to properly close the trunk of her car, and while waiting at a red light, it popped open enough to expose the bloodied clothing inside. Passengers in the car behind her noticed this and immediately called the police, providing a description of the vehicle and the direction it was heading. Minutes after Rozalba arrived at the hospital, officers intercepted her at the entrance as she carried a blood-soaked bundle in her arms. She told them it was her baby and that the newborn needed urgent medical attention. Officers escorted her to the emergency room while they waited nearby. With a trembling voice and tears in her eyes, Rozalba explained to the medical staff that she had gone into sudden labor and didn't have time to reach the hospital in advance. She said the baby had fallen onto gravel during her rushed trip to the car, and in a panic, she had wrapped the baby in the first blanket she found before driving. When a doctor informed her that she needed to be examined, Rozalba refused, insisting she was fine. This raised immediate concerns among the staff. Upon examining the baby, the medical team found several unusual cuts and puncture wounds that did not appear to be from a fall on gravel. The injuries looked like they had been inflicted with a sharp object in a chaotic manner. Fortunately, none of the wounds affected vital organs, and the medical team quickly treated them to prevent infection. Concerns were immediately communicated to the police, who insisted that Rozalba undergo a physical examination. They warned her that if she refused, they would have to use legal authority. With no other option, Rozalba reluctantly agreed. The examination confirmed the doctor's suspicions. There were no signs of childbirth or pregnancy. There was no bleeding, no physical trauma, and no other indicators, both internally and externally. Everything looked normal, indicating that her entire account was fabricated. However, the doctors chose not to confront Rozalba immediately. Instead, they asked her to call her husband, Zulmiyar, and request that he bring her personal documents since she only had her driver's license with her. They needed to investigate where the baby had come from and the source of the unusual wounds on the newborn. The condition of the baby suggested a delivery in an unsanitary setting, but the full extent of the horrifying crime had yet to be uncovered. Rozalba called Zulmiyar, informing him that she was at the hospital and that their daughter had been born, but complications had arisen. She requested that he bring some paperwork and told him where to find it. Unfortunately, she made a major oversight. She forgot about a crucial piece of evidence. While gathering the documents, Zulmiyar inadvertently picked up a medical record that belonged to someone else, specifically Flavia's file. She had taken the folder to review the test results and recommendations, and later hidden it in her drawer with her own documents. When hospital staff noticed that the medical file belonged to a woman named Flávia Godinho, who was expecting a daughter in early September, they realized the baby seemed to be hers. but was not with her. However, the pressing question remained. Where was the real mother? The police immediately began to suspect Zolmiar could be involved. He was detained, questioned about how he had obtained someone else's medical file and where his wife had gotten the baby. Clearly confused and shaken, he claimed he had no idea what was happening. When informed that Rozalba had never been pregnant, he was visibly stunned. He then asserted that this was not true, stating he had cared for Rozalba throughout her pregnancy and even claimed to have felt the baby move. He presented photos from their maternity shoot and messages he believed were from the doctor monitoring her pregnancy. However, these messages turned out to be incriminating. They were filled with spelling errors and incorrect medical terminology. Authorities quickly discovered that the texts had come from Rozalba's own phone after laying out all the facts. Zulmiar broke down in tears, covering his face with his hands. He had truly trusted his wife and was eagerly anticipating becoming a father. Meanwhile, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, had reported her missing. He informed the police that she had left with a friend to attend a baby shower, expecting to return by 9 p.m., but she never came back and her phone was off. Worried, Valdelli began calling other guests who were said to be invited to the party, only to find out in shock that the event had been cancelled the day before. As Valdelli continued to attempt to reach Rozalba, the friend who supposedly organized the gathering, his concern deepened when he discovered her phone was also turned off. Realizing he couldn't wait any longer, he went directly to the police. However, law enforcement had not yet received the hospital report regarding Rozalba and the newborn, so they were unaware that the cases might be linked. The officers said they would start searching in the morning, but that wasn't sufficient for Valdelli. He teamed up with Flavia's parents and other relatives to begin their own search. They divided into teams to cover more areas, and Valdelli decided to check the outskirts of town. It was there, while passing by an abandoned factory, that he chose to stop and investigate. Tragically, he found his wife's body, brutally disfigured, shocked and terrified. He quickly called the police, unable to understand what had happened or who could commit such a horrific act. When the police arrived, they had already been informed by the hospital about Rozalba. This woman also possessed a medical file belonging to a woman named Flavia Godinho. The authorities realized that the name of the victim discovered at an abandoned factory matched the name on the stolen medical file, which clarified the case. Forensic evidence showed that the victim had been hit at least 5 times in the head with a brick, but these injuries were not fatal on their own. The cause of death was identified as severe blood loss due to a violent attempt to remove the baby. A box cutter used in the act was found near the body. With all the evidence pointing to Rozalba's guilt, it became a straightforward case. DNA testing confirmed that the baby Rozalba attempted to claim was indeed Flavia's daughter. Despite the strong evidence against her, Rozalba continued to deny her involvement and maintained her story. Her fingerprints were discovered on the knife beside Flavia's body. Flavia's blood was found on her clothes, shoes, and hair. Investigators confirmed that Rozalba had a miscarriage months earlier and had lied about still being pregnant. She had premeditated the crime, choosing her victim in advance to take the baby without considering the consequences of her actions. Rozalba was convicted of aggravated homicide, infanticide, concealment of a corpse, obstruction of justice, kidnapping of a minor, and denial of rights to infants, in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. She later recounted the events in detail, shocking everyone in the courtroom. Her attorney claimed that Rozalba had suffered a psychological breakdown after her miscarriage and became obsessed with motherhood, losing touch with reality. However, a psychological evaluation determined that she was mentally competent and fully accountable for her actions. She was sentenced to 57 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving at least half of her sentence. Zulmiyar, Rozalba's husband, was completely exonerated. It was established that he had no knowledge of his wife's plans and had no part in the crime. Shortly after her arrest, he filed for divorce and moved away from São Juan Batista. Flavia's family also chose to leave the small town after the legal proceedings were finished. The case had become the most talked about topic in the community, and they wanted to protect young Cecilia, the name they chose for Flavia's daughter. The tragic murder of Flávia Mafra stands as a chilling reminder of how far desperation and obsession can drive a person to commit unspeakable acts. The small, tight-knit community of São Juan Batista was forever changed by this brutal crime, which shattered their sense of safety and trust. Flávia, a beloved teacher and soon-to-be mother, was robbed of her life and dreams by someone she considered a friend, leaving her family and community to grapple with unimaginable grief. Rozalba Grime's calculated deception and heinous actions not only took a life, but also exposed the depths of her fixation on fulfilling a fantasy at any cost. While justice was served with her conviction, the scars left on Flavia's loved ones and the town will endure. Cecilia, Flavia's daughter, survives as a symbol of hope amidst tragedy, raised by a family determined to honor her mother's memory. This case underscores the profound consequences of unchecked ambition and the devastating ripple effects of betrayal, serving as a somber lesson in the value of empathy, honesty, and the sanctity of human life.